President, members of council. I'm here with Mr. Whitehouse and Brandy, and we're here to hopefully introduce something that's been in the works for quite some time now, going back to our current comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2018, and then a housing report that was done and completed in 2019. I'm just going to give a real brief background on an explanation, because as you know, if you all are inclined to introduce it, then it goes through the public hearing process of both planning and zoning and county council. So this is, I'm not going to read the whole short title right now. We'll do that if it's going to be introduced, but it's the quote-unquote workforce housing ordinance. As I mentioned, this was dealt with significantly in our 2018 comprehensive development plan, particularly in the housing element of that plan. And there's a lot of goals, objectives, and strategies in that plan. I'm just going to tick off some of those that are in the whereas clauses of this ordinance. One of the housing vision for this element was to ensure the provision of decent, safe, affordable, and safe housing opportunities to improve communities and quality of life for the residents of Sussex County. There was a recognition, I think this is self-evident, that most housing, particularly on the eastern side of the county, is new and often unaffordable to low-income families, seasonal employees, entry-level workers, and recent college graduates. And then it also recognized that the shortage of affordable housing remains a very real problem for low to moderate income households in Sussex County, including many with full-time year-round jobs. And that was carried out also in the objectives to the comp plan, particularly in the housing element. And one of those objectives also was to improve the county's rental program to provide incentives to properly reflect the housing market and incentivize developers to participate in the provision of affordable housing, and also to explore ways for private developers to provide multifamily and affordable housing opportunities within Sussex County. And then finally, one of the objectives, or actually two of them, the objective and a strategy, was to facilitate and promote land use policies that enable an increase in the supply of affordable housing in areas with adequate infrastructure. And to do that, it looked at making the increased density and the ability to have affordable housing a permitted use in Sussex County. So that was in the 2018 plan. As I mentioned, in 2019, after we had done an RFP, we had a consultant, LSA, look at Sussex County, and they met with all stakeholders, county staff, developers, housing advocates, landowners, to see what the current situation is in Sussex County and what we could do to improve that situation with regard to workforce housing. And basically, it came down to, there were basically some strategy recommendations. One of the primary ones was to modify the zoning code to promote housing affordability in the growth areas identified in the comprehensive plan, including the allowance for a maximum density of 12 units per acre by right where affordable housing units are provided. So based on all of that, the ordinance that's before you for introduction really does two things. As you know, Chapter 72 is our affordable housing chapter of the code. And Article 2 of that deals with the rental program. We've got in Sussex County one existing example of a rental program project, and Brandy's office has learned a lot of lessons going through that. I think we've learned that the program, or the process that has to be followed, not only on the development side of it, but once it's implemented, the project's up and running and you've got renters in there, is cumbersome. It's a burden on her office, and also it's cumbersome on the developer to the point where we believe that that's a hindrance to people wanting to enter into that program, because we've only had one in the, I don't know, probably decade or more that we've had this program in effect that's come through. Based on those lessons learned, we've sort of flipped the process so that it's more on the developer to engage with the potential renters, make sure they qualify, and make sure they remain qualified when they're tenants, and then certify that on an annual basis back to us. Rather than currently, we're more of partners in that process, and it's a clunky process, and it's one, frankly, that if we get more of these affordable housing projects, there's a possibility it could overwhelm their staff. So again, it puts the burden on the developer to certify through a third-party accountant that they're in compliance with all of the rental restrictions, that the units are rented to affordable housing families, that they're making efforts to re-rent any vacant units to qualifying tenants, and that they're staying in compliance with the terms of the code. They certify that to us on an annual basis. Brandy's office confirms that, and then everybody goes their merry way. There's also a new additional penalty phase, or penalty aspect to the ordinance, which didn't exist before, which essentially says if they violate any of these requirements, in other words, if they rent a SCRP unit for market rate, they've got to pay that market rate to Sussex County, and it goes into our housing fund. Or if they fail to affirmatively market a vacant unit, they have to pay the market rate rent to Sussex County, and it goes into our housing funds. So those are just some fixes, like I said, based on lessons learned. The second part of the ordinance is probably more substantive, I guess you would say, and this makes affordable housing projects with 30% of the units in those projects permitted use, and is a incentive to do that. The permitted use includes up to 12 units an acre by right. So I want to make that clear. If it's by right, that means that it doesn't come for a change of zone or a conditional use to planning and zoning or county council. You're saying that if you meet these criteria, it's permitted, and they would come to planning and zoning for site plan review. So the thought is that that would promote and make it more streamlined to get affordable housing projects built in Sussex County. So there's criteria for that, though. It's not just a wide open, anything goes, anywhere goes permitted use. And I would say it's in all the residential zoning districts. So what I'm explaining now applies to all the residential zoning districts. So again, 30% of all dwelling units within the project must be SCRP units. The site must be within the town center, a developing area, or the coastal area on our future land use map as identified in the comprehensive plan. Those are all the growth areas of our zoning code. And this is one that we had a lot of input and discussion with staff about. The site must be located within a half a mile of an existing or proposed DART route so that there's public transportation that's located nearby. The site must be served by essential sewer system and essential water system. I think that kind of goes without saying with the densities we're talking about. As I said, you can get up to 12 units per acre. That's one of the criteria. There shall be a 100-foot wide setback around the entire site, and within that setback there must be the forested or landscape buffer strip that we require currently for subdivisions. The height of the townhouse or multifamily dwellings shall not exceed the greater of 52 feet or 4 stories, so there's a little bit more height. And we did 52 feet or 4 stories looking at roof lines. We didn't want necessarily flat-roofed buildings. We wanted some peak on the roofs so they don't look like barracks, so they have some architectural embellishments to them. There shall be sidewalks in all streets and roadways and parking areas within the development, and there shall also be interconnectivity to adjacent walkway system. There must be interconnectivity with any adjacent property that is zoned C1, CR1, C2, C3, C4, C5, B1, B2, or B3. So in other words, interconnectivity with any of the business or commercial zones. There shall be open space that exceeds 50% of the gross area of the entire site. And it states that the primary view from each dwelling unit shall be directed to the open space and the recreational amenities. So those are the criteria, and they weren't just sort of pie-in-the-sky requests. I think if you'll remember, we did back in October last fall, we presented to you all a PowerPoint. Jamie's office, with the help of a consultant, actually took those criteria and they looked at a couple things. We've looked at the DART routes to see where they are, first of all. We've looked at where those sort of relate to the growth areas in our comp plan to make sure that everything fits. And we looked at property sizes just to make sure there were sufficiently sized properties in those areas. And then his office with staff actually went or with a consultant, sort of roughly designed projects to make sure that with the 50% open space and the 100-foot setback and the parking requirements and 12 units an acre, that these projects were actually doable. Because we didn't want to create a project that right from the jump nobody could do because the design requirements just made it impossible. So there was that exercise, if you want to describe that again, we're talking about it, that we did just to show that it is a feasible program.
So when we went through this back at the end of October, we actually went through step by step the steps that the consultants follow. But if I just put the current slide on the screen, is that we fed these design parameters into some parcel assumptions. So we gave the consultants a 10-acre parcel, and we asked them to, can this work? Can this be accommodated? Can the setbacks be achieved? Assuming density and assuming some building sizes, so assuming 1,000 square feet per unit across 4 floors, is it viable at 10 acres? And the consultants came back saying, yes, based on the parameters that were given, it was viable at 10 acres. Then we decided to scale it up and said, is the same criteria capable of being scaled up to a 30-acre parcel using the same design parameters? And again, assuming 1,000 square foot per unit across 4 floors, and assuming that they include on this drawing here, you can see in the bottom right, you can see the assumption sizes for the building and how those units fit. They were able to very roughly calculate that the design parameters are workable and achievable, although each site would have to be looked at specifically as part of site plan review. So from a numerical point of view, it was viable, but this was a very high-level analysis.
So that's essentially the presentation. I will say, as you know, I'm very conscious of the heft of this ordinance. It's 34 pages, but I like to explain some of the background on there. First of all, as you also know, I like to put it in big font so everybody can read it. But we had to restate all of Article 2 of Chapter 72. That's the current SCRP code. And so that added quite a bit of text to this just by restating it so we can incorporate the changes throughout that. And then, as I mentioned, this workforce housing program as a permitted use appears in all of the residential zoning districts. So we had to restate those criteria each time in all the residential zoning districts. So, as far as questions, I'm sure this is going to go through a fairly heavy vetting process throughout the public hearings. But we would like to get that process started, if we could, by introducing this today.
Any questions of council? Questions of council, what you've heard so far?
Mr. President, I have some detailed questions, but I guess it's more appropriate to wait till we get to the public hearing portion.
Yeah. Anybody else? Who's going to read the short title?
I can read the short title, Mr. President, with Mr. Moore's agreement. It is an ordinance to amend the Code of Sussex County, Chapter 72, Article 2, Section 72-16 through 72-28, and Chapter 115, Article 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and those are all Roman numerals. Section 115-20, 115-25, 115-29, 115-34, 115-37, 115-42, 115-45, 115-50, 115-53, and 115-58 regarding affordably priced rental units and the Sussex County Rental Unit SCRP program.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Raleigh, you had to...
I would be excited to introduce this. This has been the biggest milestone so far in a process that started, I guess, 3 years ago, shortly after Councilman Hudson and I arrived here, when we had a consultant come in and give us recommendations, and and the things I like about it is it's market driven. It allows the market to respond. It gets government out of the way, which is going to help the market, I think, respond. It also provides some incentives, and I think that makes it sustainable. And I feel like we're chipping away at this problem, and I think it'll also have other benefits, such as reducing the amount of traffic, or at least mitigating some of the traffic that's on the road with people driving from Seaford to Lewis to work, and hopefully even cut down on sprawl and the other issues we talk about a lot. And so I'm excited about it. I know there will be a lot of questions, and I think that who knows what the final form will take, but it's a milestone, and we're working on it. So yeah,
Okay,
happy to introduce it.
Mr. Raleigh introduced it, and we
Thank
will
you very much.
move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.